You're listening to the Intercoastal Podcast, part of the Destination Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Intercoastal Podcast, where we explore the people, places, and stories that make Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands so unforgettable. I'm your host, Daquan Mickens, and today's episode is all about storytelling, connection, and the impact of destination marketing. Joining us today is Adam Stoker, podcast host, marketing expert, and familiar face here in Beaufort. Adam has spent years helping destinations tell their stories in meaningful ways, and he's no stranger to what makes this place so special. Welcome to the episode, Adam.
Daquan, I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
I was going to say, I've met you multiple times. We've talked here in the office in Beaufort. We've met out on the road.
Yeah.
So it's great. Thank you for joining us. And we'll talk about, your journey as a podcast host, everything you do, and kind of what keeps bringing you back here to Beaufort.
Great.
So to kind of start out, Adam, you built your strong reputation as a podcast host, as a destination expert. What made you so passionate about, destination marketing and kind of telling that story?
Yeah. So I own a marketing firm, and I actually had a unique opportunity in 2016 to go from employee of the marketing firm to owner of the marketing firm. I had the unique opportunity to buy the organization I was working for from the previous owner. And along the way, my responsibility prior to buying the company had been to identify new business opportunities, bring in new clients, and then build infrastructure underneath me to kind of support that. The funny thing about that is I didn't have near the experience that you would need to truly understand how to build infrastructure underneath you, but I was using some experience I had at a previous organization and basically winging it the best I could.
Yeah.
And in 2012, as part of that role, I was looking for new potential clients, and I drove by a building that said Cedar City Bryan Head Tourism Bureau. And the word tourism, I said, there might be marketing budget there. That's really all. I didn't even know what a tourism bureau was. And I walked in and I asked the group there if they needed help with their marketing. And they said, you know what? As a matter of fact, we do.
Yeah.
And that started a really passionate career for me in tourism. By 2016, when I bought the company, we had gotten multiple referrals and expanded to about 10 tourism-related organizations or DMOs within the state of Utah. And I was like, oh, man, we want to go all in on tourism. It was about 50% of our business by the time I bought it.
Yeah.
And so as we tried to expand outside of Utah, we made the ignorant assumption that it was going to be as easy to expand outside of Utah as it had been to expand within Utah, and started to realize, oh my gosh, there's a lot of competition out here. There's a lot of marketing firms that are working with tourism destinations. And so we felt like we needed something, a place where we could show people that we knew what we were talking about with destination marketing. I had never really been into podcasting. I had experienced the gateway drug to podcasting, which is, true crime and those types of storytelling. I had listened to the Serial podcast, but I had never actually done one. But I had a guy on my staff that had a lot of experience with radio and audio editing and things like that. And so he helped kind of guide me through the process of setting up the show. And I just kind of started talking. And that moment of just starting the conversation, recording the conversation was life-changing for me. And kind of, I see everything before I started that podcast in 2019. I see all of that as like the earlier generation of my career. And then there's the rest of my career after starting the podcast. And it's amazing how different those two legs of my career are.
Yeah. And it's crazy because I've seen you start a podcast. I started in 2020. So it's fairly new to podcasting. And just to see how not only your podcast has grown, but your influence in the industry, as someone in the tourism industry, in the destination marketing industry, we see it all over the place. And you're everywhere, whether it's on panels discussing the importance of destination marketing, or whether it's on LinkedIn, or I'm just scrolling Facebook and I'll see one of your videos. So it's pretty cool to see the growth. And then on that other side of that, it's interesting to see the destinations that kind of work with you, in that you guys at Revolt and you guys work with, including us here at Beaufort, So could you tell us the start of, when you decided to go pitch to these different BMOs, destinations, why a podcast would be great versus like nobody else was doing that at that moment?
Well, I quickly recognized, and there were a couple of industry podcasts that were really good out there and are still around. But I recognized that when you have the long form format to tell your story, it can be so much more impactful than some of kind of the quick hits that you get in a lot of other places. And so I started to get messages from people all over the world who were listening to the show. And we're talking within 6 months of starting the show. And the reason I think that happened is, one, I chose a really good name for the show. It was called the Destination Marketing Podcast.
Amazing.
So anybody that searched those terms in the podcast platforms, my show was popping up for that reason. And I started to get messages from people saying, hey, I found this to be really valuable, really helpful for me individually in my role. And when I got the message from the guy in Italy saying that, I'm like, holy cow, people all over the world, are listening to this thing.
Yeah.
And I saw the power of what it had done for my business. To give those that might be listening to this conversation some context, I own one of the relatively smaller agencies in the destination marketing industry. There are agencies who do hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that have employees all over the world and have a lot of reach. There's no way that me or that I should be in the thought leadership position that I'm in the industry, but I am because I started recording my conversations into the microphone, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful for that and started to recognize, well, if that can happen for me, that can happen for other people as well.
Yeah.
And I looked at destinations because when we talk about what destinations have to offer that no one else does, the thing that makes a destination unique is actually the stories of the destination, because I can get beach and history anywhere, but I can't get Beaufort's history anywhere, right? And so some of the stories that happen within a destination are truly the things that make it unique. And yet most destinations, when I started in this industry, were running print ads that had a pretty picture, a catchy headline, and said, book your trip today. Well, why would they?
Yeah.
And the podcast format gives you a long form platform where you can actually tell a story in depth enough to where it can resonate enough to make a difference with somebody, to make them feel something. Right. And so when I recognized that, I said, I really think this could help destinations. And I think it'd be kind of fun to tell the story of how I talked to Rob Wells and ultimately Beaufort started the Intercoastal podcast. Should I do that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Feel free.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do when I recognized that what had worked well for me could also work well for destinations, I got 5 destinations that I felt like could be good pilots for this program to see if it would actually work for a destination. And so in March of 2020, I had 5 destinations lined up, committed, and ready to go. And of course, March of 2020 was when COVID was hitting, right? And in fact, I remember the night that at the time President Trump said, we're shutting off all flights to and from China. My world kind of fell apart because I knew exactly what that was going to mean for the tourism industry, right?
Yeah.
And over the next few weeks, it was chaos. And every single destination that I had lined up to do the podcast trial dropped out with one exception. And that was Rob from Beaufort, South Carolina. And so he and I talked, and I called him and I said, hey, what do you want to do here? Everybody else is dropping off, and I understand if you want to too. And he said, no, I made a commitment. And when everything shut down, what better thing to do than start telling our story in the best way that we can? And that I had a lot of respect for Rob's response to that and his recognition that it was actually an opportunity as opposed to something that you needed to shut down. And it was cool because it gave us the opportunity to take what we were going to spread across 5 clients and really focus it on one show, making a show that was going to be unique and valuable. And really proud of that, because if Rob hadn't stayed on, who knows, even what my position in the marketplace would look like, because now we've helped dozens of destinations start and maintain their podcasts. And I also think our influence, even for people that we haven't helped start their podcast, there's dozens of other destinations who believed they could because of some of the work that we did early on, which is really cool. So to see Rob do that, I remember one of the most satisfying events I've experienced in my career was when I got a text from Rob, and it was a screenshot of a couple who had emailed him and said, "Hey, we've learned all about your podcast, and we're spending our honeymoon in Beaufort. And can you give us a couple of a piece of or contact info for a couple of the places that we've heard on your show?"
Yeah.
And man, when he sent me that, I'm like, this is something. We found something here. This is cool because it gave us the ability to reach people that maybe we never would have reached through paid media or other tactics.
Yeah.
But because they searched up relevant keywords on the podcast platform, they found the show, they prepared for the trip, and ultimately ended up visiting the destination.
Yeah. And I would agree. Like, you guys, that forward thinking of, okay, most people are starting podcasts. Like, this could be something greater than just a podcast, showing and telling those stories. And I could name countless stories of just like that, or have like a couple messaging Rob and say, "Oh, we heard your recipe. Can you give us that recipe and let us know exactly how to make it?" Things like that. Or I started STS, Southeast Tourism Society, shortly after I was on the podcast, and I'm talking in another room, just talking and not paying attention. We're walking through older building in Georgia, and someone's like, "Your voice, you're on the Intercoastal Podcast." So and me being so shocked to be like, "Oh wait, you heard that actually?" That's it. Like, and this was in 2021, like when I first started within that first year. So it was mind-boggling that someone actually heard it and could recognize my voice. And the same thing happens in the visitor center when people can recognize and figure out, "Oh yeah, you're the host of the podcast." And who would have thought when it was started in 2020 that it would end up where it's at, about to be 200 episodes in. And it's incredible, the shift of, small mom and pop podcasts to the growth now that we're implementing video, and we're implementing shorts, and kind of just growing it more and more each day. And that's credit to you, Adam, and your vision, even though you didn't think it was a vision, but everything starts out as an idea. Yeah. And that idea grows into now other podcasts are starting in different marketing, like not just agencies, but different destinations are starting podcasts. And you see it all over, from major brand destinations to smaller ones as well.
That's one of the things that I get really excited about in the tourism industry in general. Is I don't think people recognize what can come from taking a risk and trying something. Yep. And so I took a risk in 2019 and started a podcast. I look back at those first episodes and I felt like I was awful, right? Like I can't even listen to them now. Yes, I've learned a lot since then. And yet it made a difference. And when you think about what can happen there, and the spider web of events that come from taking that risk, it's pretty crazy. And it's one thing for me to do that, and I get my own spider web of the ideas that can come from that. Yeah. But if everybody in the industry is taking a risk, trying something new, testing something new, think about how fast the progression can be throughout the industry, and pushing things forward. And I think that's really critical, especially as we're in a time when AI is changing everything, and the way people are booking trips is changing, and what consumers value is changing, right? Like, I don't think you see the younger generation standing and reading plaques at museums the way our grandparents did when they would go to a museum, right? Yeah. And so there's all this stuff that's changing. And if we don't feel comfortable taking a risk, trying something new, testing out an idea, we may miss out on some of the evolution that could really help keep the industry relevant and moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. So we're going to transition here and kind of go into your visit to Beaufort, and kind of from an outsider's perspective. Most of the time on the podcast, we hear from a local's perspective, or someone who moved here and actually live here or own a business here. So kind of get that different mindset. So do you remember your first visit to Beaufort and what stood out right away?
Yeah, so I actually moved to Utah from Statesboro, Georgia. Okay. So Statesboro is about an hour away from Savannah. I think it's about an hour and a half from here, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And Savannah had always been kind of this mystical place for me. My parents would always say it's really cool, but as a kid, it just sounded like a cool place, right?
Yeah, you overlook it.
Yeah. And then, fast forward 20 years later, I guess it wasn't 20 years at the time, but I got married in 2007, and my wife and I really like to go on trips and travel. And one of the places that seemed kind of romantic in my brain was Savannah. And so I thought, oh man, we should book a trip to Savannah. And I promise this ends in Beaufort, right? So my wife and I, we booked a trip that was 4 days in Savannah, 3 days in Hilton Head, because we really wanted to kind of split up the beachside things. And so we had a great time in Savannah, but on the way to Hilton Head, we actually stopped in Beaufort and spent a day in Beaufort going, why didn't we just stay here? and it was quaint, and like some of the history here was amazing. There's the carriage rides going through town and the guided tours. And we're just like, this is more our vibe, right? And so had a great time and ending up in Hilton Head, because we had booked our trip there. And we've now come back, I think 3 times, 2 or 3. It's hard because I've been here so much for work too, to remember how many was pleasure and how much was business.
Yeah.
But we've come back a few times and just had an incredible experience each time we've been here. And the cool thing is too, there's always a new restaurant that we haven't tried when we come back, so we get to try new things still. But this is our speed. I like a walkable city, and this is definitely a walkable city. I love how you can walk down just along the port, just on downtown, even though right now I know there's some construction going on down there. The vibe of Beaufort is something that you don't get in a lot of the major destinations that you book.
Yeah.
And that's why I was so thrilled when I got the opportunity to work with Rob.
Yeah.
And now you, because I already loved this place. And so knowing how to sell the destination wasn't going to be one of the barriers that I would have to overcome. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's coming from a destination marketer. So you've seen the other destinations, you've seen everything that's out there. So that kind of passion and love for the area is true to who you are and what Beaufort has to offer. So that, makes it a lot easier to tell the destination story of Beaufort. Not only it being a special place, but having a special place in your heart as well.
And I can also put myself in the shoes of like, oh, why would someone want to come here? Well, I can answer that because I do, right? Yeah. And that's been really, really helpful.
Yeah. And from a storyteller's perspective, what makes the destination so truly resonate with the audience or with everyone who visits?
Well, so there's a unique, I always love the drive-in to Beaufort. Yeah. Because as I'm driving from and I usually come in from Hilton Head. So as I'm driving from Hilton Head into Beaufort, you have what I would say is like the progress side of Beaufort, right? And there's like the big chain stores and restaurants. There's a Chick-fil-A, right? And then all of a sudden you cross a line and it's like you're going back in time. And I don't mean that as a negative at all.
Oh, yeah.
But there's one thing I hate in a travel destination, and that's when all I can find is chain restaurants.
Yeah.
Right. And in fact, if I go to a travel destination and I eat at a chain restaurant, I'm disappointed. Right. Because every destination should have really unique dining that's true to the area.
Yeah.
And so you almost pass through this line where from that point forward, you're in what makes Beaufort, right? And so I just think that stark kind of line between progress and preservation is you don't get that in a lot of places. And that really makes Beaufort unique. And then you feel like you've gone back in time and you're living what, somebody that was summering from the Northeast would have felt when they're walking the streets of Beaufort. Right. And so I don't know, there's something about the quaintness of that experience that you feel like you've gotten out of the things that make the world kind of challenging sometimes. And
every day
it slows down here and you got a lot less to worry about.
Yeah, I agree. That's the reason they call it the slow country. So
that's right.
As soon as you get and that was when I moved here, I didn't know anything about Beaufort. I tell it all the time on almost every episode. Me and my wife, never been to Beaufort, never visited. I've only heard of it because people lived here that I went to school with. And when I got here, I was from the upstate. Even in the upstate, I was so used to go. It was kind of an adjustment period to kind of be like, well, everything's a little slower here. It's hard for me to kind of get adjusted to the slow pace. but I'm adjusted to the slow pace now. It feels like a vacation every time I walk out of my house, even just to go to the store. The Spanish moss is over the trees. The sun sets right in the right spots on the water. And some days I'm just like, you know what? Let me just pull off, see the sunset on the water, and then get back on and get back to the house. It's just that magical feeling here in Beaufort, and a lot of people, and to why a lot of the people we have on the podcast, they end up moving here and start a business here because they say, we came here for vacation, we fell in love, and we couldn't leave. We wanted to live here. So that's kind of how it goes.
I told Rob this too today when we were talking, that there's nowhere else that I go that I spend as much time on long walks than I do here in Beaufort.
Yeah.
There's something about walking up and down all of the streets near downtown. I mean, the variety of home architecture here is just crazy. You see some houses and you're like, okay, that one's got to be 200 years old. It feels like, right? And then you've got some new houses mixed in, and I don't know. I walk more here than I do anywhere else because it's just, it doesn't get boring.
Oh, it doesn't. I'm driving home yesterday and I see a house that I've never seen before, and it's got columns on the front porch. I'm like, man, the house is old, but it's just columns and someone lives there. I see the porch on the top deck. The door's wide open. Yeah. And I was just like, someone lives there. It's insane to think about that someone's living in a house that old at this point. So it's just a cool aspect of Beaufort that kind of gets overlooked living here. But me being on the podcast and having people like you, visitors, come in and say from an outsider's perspective, it puts it in a different world where you're thinking like, oh, wow, I'm actually lucky that I actually get to live here. So back to the podcast, you've seen the Intercoastal podcast grow in different state from the earliest stages to where it is at now. What are your thoughts on the growth and the evolution?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I had this hypothesis when we started doing podcasts for destinations. I was like, I've got the perfect format for a destination podcast, right? So I said, first, we'll say what's happening that week in the destination. And then second, we'll do a behind the scenes, live like a local type segment. And then the third thing that we'll do is feature a stakeholder of some kind, right? Yeah. And I look back on that going, that is so structured, it wouldn't be entertaining.
Yeah, unnatural.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I really admired about where Rob and the team took it at the beginning is they just kind of let it come naturally and it evolved into something that was a true show to this destination as opposed to being a cookie cutter, which was my original vision for it. So I was wrong. I just want to throw that out there. I was wrong with what my original vision was because it has to be unique. It has to be authentic to the destination. And I think that the evolution of that's been really good. And then we've just recently made the change to go from audio only to more of a video centric podcast, which I think is going to be great for the versatility of the show and our ability to distribute it and get in front of more people. And I think with where obviously other podcasts are going and the industry is going, video just makes sense.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And so I feel like this new video centric version is going to be really valuable. It's going to allow us eventually to be able to insert B-roll where it makes sense to insert B-roll and showcase the destination a little bit more through a podcast. The other thing that I think is really brilliant that I credit Rob with, and I actually talk about this when I'm talking to other people who are thinking about starting a podcast for a destination, is Rob really understands the value of earned media, public relations, right? Getting other people to write about or share the story of the destination. And what he recognized early on is if there's a travel writer that's thinking about coming or another reporter or something that's thinking about coming to the destination, if you send them relevant podcast episodes to help either prepare them for their trip or convince them to take the trip, they're much more likely not only to come have that experience, but then do a better job of telling the story when they regurgitate it and write their own story. And I think that's pretty innovative. And I've seen that now used a lot throughout the industry. And I think Rob really kind of trailblazed that in the destination space.
Yeah. Recently was on the podcast with Caleb Sullivan.
Yeah.
And we were talking and he was asking how the podcast has affected my everyday work situation as the sales side, along with the marketing and anything like that, along with avocation. So it kind of touched on it on his podcast. The podcast helped in every situation. When we first started the podcast, we just thought it'd be, stakeholders and kind of telling the story, but then that in the advocacy side of things, but then it advanced to where, okay, now I can use it on the sales side, and we have a group coming and they want to know about Forrest Gump. Well, let me send you this Forrest Gump impersonator episode when we had Paul Dangler on, and he's telling his history about Forrest Gump, and he knows so much about the movie and him being able to go travel the world as a Forrest Gump impersonator. And then you get to Beaufort, and now you're meeting Forrest Gump impersonator. And it's really cool on that aspect of now you're turning just a listening podcast into an experience.
Yeah.
It's more than just, I'm listening to the podcast. Now I'm listening with purpose of I'm going to this destination, or I'm listening because now I need to know more information. So when I do get there, I'm prepared. And now, I saw this on the podcast. There's the dollar bill when I talk to this restaurant owner, and now I get to see it in person, or I get to meet the person I heard. And now it's more of familiarity of now it's not just I'm going to the destination. It's making it more than it actually is.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
That's kind of how I see it. And the podcast has amplified beyond what I thought it would be. And just like the people I get to meet in my everyday that I wouldn't have met, that's the stories that really hit home. I get to meet restaurant owners, kayak owners, tour guides, fishing people, just the locals that you don't come across on an everyday life.
Yeah. I know you have a lot of people that listen to this show that might not necessarily be somebody that's going to start a podcast or a destination marketer, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to make this a little bit applicable to anybody that might be listening. The value when we talk about what's happened with these podcasts, the both mine and the Intercoastal podcast, the value is not necessarily in the fact that we started a podcast.
Yeah.
The value is in that we tried something new and allowed trying something new to spark an evolution. And we're no longer the same people that we were when we tried something new and took a risk. And so I really want that. And this could be as simple as book a trip to somewhere you've never been, right? If you've never been to Beaufort, book your trip to Beaufort, right? But the trying something you've never tried before, getting out of your comfort zone, whatever it is, has the ability to start a snowball to change your life in a way that you never thought possible. My life looks completely different today than it would have if I hadn't started the podcast, right? I now am on stage at some of the biggest conferences in the destination marketing industry and beyond because I started a podcast. And when I started the podcast, it was just, do I start a podcast or don't I? It wasn't, do I start a podcast and become what I'm going to become? And so I think it's really critical that anybody that's listening, that's debating, do I try something new? Do I take a risk? Do I book the trip? Yes. Yeah. Because you have no idea. Your eyes are not yet open to what it can become for your life. And the only way to find out is to try it.
Yeah. And I agree. That's the best way to look for anything in life. Just go for it. Go for the chance. You never know.
Yeah.
But Adam, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We really appreciate it. Not only you being on it, but you helping launch it, bringing the idea to Rob accepting. It's come a long way. And here we are today, wrapping up this episode of the Intercoastal podcast. And thank you for telling your story of destination marketing.
Thank you.
Could you tell people where they can go if they want to listen to your podcast or if they want to follow up or know more about you?
Yeah, so I have two podcasts. You can find me at the Destination Marketing Podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. There's another one called Destination Discourse. And that one's a little more of a debate style show. For those that want to hear a little bit of controversy, listen to that one. And then my company is called Brand Revolt, and that URL is thebrandrevolt.com. Or you can email me directly at adam@thebrandrevolt.com.
Well, thank you so much. That'll be it for today's episode. Huge thanks to Adam Stoker for joining us and sharing his perspective, the power of storytelling in marketing. Be sure to follow us at @Visitor_Beaufort_SC on Instagram and subscribe so you never miss an episode highlighting the stories that shape the Sea Islands. Until next time.
This has been another episode of the Intercoastal Podcast, hosted by Daquan Mickens and the team at Visit Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands. Produced by Brand Revolt.